Hello everyone, today we're going to be modeling a Spangenhelm or just a helmet. You can apply that technique to any helmet. I'll just set up my file real quick and change the color management in the render engine. I advise you do the same, switch to cycles, etc. Then I'm going to add an HDRI, Studio One. You can use any HDRI. Then I will add we're going to add some add-ons. Loop tools and extra mesh both are installed in Blender. So Shift A to add a round cube and then switch the operator presets to a quad sphere. Then we're going to add a mirror modifier, turn off the viewport visibility and turn on clipping. Then we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier, set it to 2, and then a solidify modifier as well. Okay, so in edit mode, delete the bottom half of the sphere, keep the middle row, and then we're going to move it up a tiny bit. This will be the base of our helmet. Now in Blender Kit, I will look up for a head model just to have an idea of the proportions and the scale. So I'll just download that real quick and scale down my helmet, which was way too big. Then I'll place it over the head, over here. Then I scale it down a tiny bit on the x-axis, and I'll shade it smooth, and then I will extrude the bottom row of vertices, just like so. Then in edit mode, I'll just spin around and scale it up a tiny bit so it's less of a sphere and more of a sphere. Okay, so the game plan. We're going to be making the cheek protectors, just like I said. So we'll create one big surface taken from a few vertices of our circle, extrude those vertices after separating them from the main mesh into a big ugly surface. And now, don't you fear, we're just going to scale down that surface, curve it a tiny bit to have our main shape. And then with the shrink wrap method that I used for the car tutorial, and I'll show it, don't worry, we're going to add the details and trim the excess surface. This will guarantee a very clean result without losing too much time in topology and edge flow in the meantime. Just like that. Next, we're going to select those vertices. About the width of the cheek protectors, you can take extra vertices. It's always better to have more than less in this technique. Then I'll use Shift D to duplicate it and then extrude those on the Z axis. Never mind, I'll just move them a tiny bit to move them to the end position, of the cheek piece. Then I'll rotate them on the X axis to have a bit of a more accurate shape. Add a loop cut in the middle, and we're going to move it outward to give it a bit of a curve. And I'll just shade that smooth. I use the quick favorite menu just like last time. Okay, now I'm just going to tweak the shape for this. And you can see that it clips quite a lot in the head model at the moment. It's not perfectly accurate, so I wouldn't take that too seriously, but I'll just try to fix it quickly, like just adjust it a tiny bit. So selecting the rear vertices, I'll just move them on the Y axis, just a tiny bit at a time, X axis if needed. And now you can see that this was a bit too much, so I'll just move those back inward, and a bit of clipping is fine. I won't use the head model in the final renders. Okay. So this is our main surface. Let's just tweak it some more by adding a loop cut here and curving it inward even more. We will now make the base mesh. So to do that, we'll need to go in edit mode and just delete the excess that we had of our mirror and apply it. I don't really need to apply it, to be honest. Then I'll just change that to keep corners under the subdivision surface modifier to have like sharp corners instead of rounded ones. And then I'll crank up the subdivision to 5 or 4 if your PC is slower. Rename the mesh to base mesh. Then we're going to duplicate it and rename the new one to like helmet reduce the subdivision to 2, and I will hide the base mesh in the viewport and the render and disable its solidify modifier. Now, on the new mesh, I will add 2 shrink wrap modifiers. One shrink wrap modifier for now. Don't listen to me. A mirror modifier, again, that's what, if you didn't delete the other one, don't worry. So you just need to have one mirror, a subdivision, a shrink wrap, and a solidify. That's all you need for now. Okay, in the vertex group tab, I will create a new one and assign all the vertices to it. And then in the shrink wrap, I will set the effect to that vertex group so that our entire mesh is shrink wrap. This means we can start separating the panels. So I will add a loop cut over here and then separate the selection to create like this metal rim that will be at the base. Now I will flatten this row of vertices on the x-axis using SX0. Then I will select the loop cut and separate into a new mesh again using right click. Then, just do that. And then I will duplicate the bottom band just like so. And I will turn on clipping. And we're going to apply the mirror modifier. I duplicated one just to keep one as a backup, so to speak. And this will allow us to scale it down more evenly and keeping its shape nice. I will just create a secondary metal band on the top, just like so. And we can angle them if needed. Now don't worry if it intersects with the mesh right now. I'll just delete the other half so our mirror works perfectly now. Using the solidify offset, you can tweak it, but I'll just do that for the main band at the center and not for the rim. Okay, extrude that one down a tiny bit and sliding a vertex up using G twice to create like a narrow shape. Okay, then we're going to do the same for the back, so extrude and then select one vertex and slide it upwards, just like that. Now for this band over here, I'll just create a secondary one. So using a loop cut, I will separate this into another smaller band just over there and add one loop cut here to tighten the edges. And I will slide it down a tiny bit and separate that into another mesh. So we have 3 bands, so to speak, at the bottom. Now I will add one loop cut in the center and I will duplicate the shrink wrap modifier and create a new vertex group and assign it to that specific shrink wrap. Set the shrink wrap to outside surface and then play with the offset to have an offset from the base mesh. So you can see that we have a tiny bit of a bump and I'll just play with the offset a tiny bit more to get more volume. Okay, next we will look into editing the shape of our cheek protectors, and you can use other unit types. I'm using millimeters just because it's more practical for those type of objects. So for that, we'll make the base mesh visible, and then in edit mode we can move the cheeks a tiny bit inward. Obviously I would just remove that. Remove one half and add a mirror modifier because I applied the other one like a dum-dum. So I'll just move them inward a tiny bit. Don't worry if it clips with the head. I don't really care anymore. I'll just move those inward as well to have a bit of a more natural or flatter shape that aligns more closely with the reference. I'll just make them this is not the base mesh, by the way. We moved back to the final ones, so that's why I deleted the bottom row, just so we can start fresh with another shape or another try if you want. So add the loop cut to tighten those corners at the top. separate the selection from the main mesh, and then selecting the bottom row will extrude it once, and then rotating it and scaling it down a tiny bit to create a shape that looks a bit prettier. So it's always the same principle: extrude, scale, rotate, and slide the vertices using by pressing G twice on your keyboard. And now I'll just dissolve some edge loops because we have way too many for being able to work with the mesh easily. And since it's shrink wrapped, we don't really need to care about the curvature because our base mesh already takes care of that for us. I'll just flatten the bottom a tiny bit to create a nicer looking shape. Just like that. And don't worry about the edges not being very tight at the moment. We'll fix that problem very soon. Add loop cut in the middle to create this kind of spike shape. Not sure how to describe it. And then add another one at the top just to create more of a round edge. Just like so. Add loop cut to tighten it, and it won't even leave a mark in the curvature because of our shrink wrap. Now I'll just create a very simple metal shader just so we can see the reflections better. So I'll just apply one and then link the materials using Ctrl L. And you can see that this is looking pretty good. And then in the edit mode of the cheek protectors, I'll just work the back a tiny bit to have another more a sharper angle, if you will. Okay, let's inset the faces just a tiny bit to create a protective rim, so to speak. Then I'll delete those vertices at the top and flatten the row just below. And you may need to move it up a tiny bit or move it down just so it doesn't try to shrink wrap to the helmet part of the base mesh. So this is what we got at the moment. And I'll just slide that inset a tiny bit inward just to have a bit more room for the piece we're about to make. Then select that row of vertices, duplicate it, and then separate selection. Selecting that new mesh, we're going to go into the modifiers tab and then play with the offset of the solidified. Then under the subdivision surface, turn back on keep corners. And this is starting to look pretty good. It's a good base for modeling the rest of the helmet. Now let's take care of that centerpiece over there. I'll just play with my denoiser, it's a bit too aggressive in the viewport. Okay, to do that, let's turn back on keep corners and then add loop cut to tighten that edge. Just like so, that's perfect. And then play with the offset of that metal band just so it stops collapsing. You don't need to go all the way up. Okay, that looks good to me. And then for the central part where we want to create a bit of a crest. So adding 2 loop cuts to tighten those edges, we will create this more jagged edge, if you will. Then what I want to do is increase the height of the crest. So selecting the middle vertices, I will create a new shrink wrap modifier, duplicating the other one, set it to outside surface, set an offset to a few millimeters, and then create a new vertex group and assign those vertices to the new vertex group, just like so. Now you can see it's a bit too intense at the bottom, and I can just select the vertices over here and remove them from the vertex group, just like that. And this is looking much better. Now I want to make the whole helmet a bit less spherical. So selecting the base mesh, go into edit mode and scale it on the z-axis. Just a tiny bit, just like that. And then you can hide the base mesh and it should look fine. Now I want to make those a tiny bit smaller, so I will just scale them down in edit mode. Let's get rid of that trim piece. We will make a better one later. I just want to tweak the cheek part. Don't be afraid to just remove some parts and make better ones if you're not happy with the result. And the advantage of that shrink wrap technique is that it's very easy to tweak without destroying the surface quality or the curvature of your mesh. And we're pretty much done with those cheek pieces. We'll remake the edge trim later on. And now for the eye-shaped plate, we'll just select two vertices, extrude them to create this part. Then selecting those, one edge, we'll just extrude it down a tiny bit. And that is the general idea behind this. So selecting an edge, we'll just separate it into a new mesh. And then let's just turn off the shrink wrap visibility and extrude. I'll just dissolve the middle vertices just because we don't need that many. So I'll just have two vertices that I will extrude on the x-axis in the first place to create this kind of V shape, and move it down a tiny bit just according to your reference or your likings. And I will just play with it. So extrude, move it just so it follows the general curvature of the helmet. Just like so. Let's just extrude it a tiny bit more on the side, just so it looks more like the reference. So I don't know what to tell you. So I'll just move them until I like the look of it. And we can try to extrude down. Although I think this will be better if we add a loop cut here and extrude further back, just like that. Two vertices, tighten the nostril part, and just make the whole support bigger, and make the eyes a bit wider so it has a bit more personality. And this is where you can get pretty creative with that helmet. You can just make patterns and different shapes and really give it a personality. So selecting the band, I will just remove some faces using the inset tool and then delete them that were behind the eyes, just so we don't have as much room, so to speak. I'll just slide it a tiny bit so the hole isn't as big as it was before. This is optional, by the way. It's just nobody will see the interior of that helmet, at least for me. So no big deal if you just made the hole bigger. So it's important to look at the reference while you're modeling very often. And you can see that this wasn't looking too good, and we'll make it into a separate part. So I'll just move them over there, just like so. And adding a loop cut over there and then selecting those two edges will create the nose protector. So I'll just extrude it down in side view until it's about right below the middle of the cheek protectors. Then add a loop cut and move it down towards the bottom. set your pivot to active element, and then scale it a tiny bit. And just like for the other parts, this is where you can get pretty creative. I will play with mine quite a bit, so excuse me for that. You can accelerate the video if you're happy with the shape you have right now. I'll just add loop cut here to tighten it, and the loop cut there to do the same. We may need to rework the edge flow in that area, so dissolve that edge loop, sorry. And then in setting the faces instead, this will be much better for us. And then deleting the vertices next to the mirror axis, we will just snap them back into position to create like this protective rim all around. Now this might be not sharp enough to my liking, so I will just add a loop cut over here and turn on auto merge, and then slide those vertices towards the center one just to merge them automatically. Now this is looking pretty good, but I want to make my nasal protector a bit softer. So I'll just select some vertices, slide them around, and just like I said, if you're happy with your shape, go on in the video. I don't want you to feel depressed by feeling like you need to stay with me. Just go on, do your thing, and then I'll just make that a tiny bit more puffier or rounded, if you will, just to give it some nice reflections when the lights will hit it. I'll do the same for the outside edges and do it on the x-axis as well, just so it's not a unidirectional stretch. Now selecting the outer row, we will create a bit of a bigger or a thicker piece just by moving them outward and then cranking the subdivision a tiny bit. Then add loop cut to make this sharper, and we have a pretty good nasal piece to nasal protector, facial protector, I don't know what you want to call it. I'll just tweak mine some more, so don't worry, just skip ahead. It's nothing too big. Just like that, I have my final trim. So I'll just duplicate those two edges and separate them into a new mesh that we will then extrude to make the, to connect them to the nasal protector. I'll just slide them a tiny bit so they fit the shape that I want. Okay, extrude them once, just like that. Move them inside you as well, just so it's not only moved on the x-axis. Select those two vertices and then connect them to the center part. Just like so. And this is where you can get pretty creative as well and give a lot of personality to your helmet. So I'll just extrude that and over here as well, just to tighten it. Although we may need to move it higher, like so. Same thing for here, and we could even connect them at the center. It would solve a few problems. I don't think it would create any problems either. So yeah, it's definitely a viable idea. Now just move them a tiny bit, and you can see that you can give some pretty funny expression to your helmet just by changing the angles and the thickness. So I'll just play with the shape. I want kind of a very wide band just to have some place to create some patterns in it, in the texture. I'll just decide to disconnect those. It's no big deal. You can keep them connected. I think it will be better if we disconnect them in the end. This is looking pretty good though. I'm quite happy with the overall shape. Now we're going to make like this deflector, so selecting some vertices that make up the eyelids, if you will. We'll just separate them into a new mesh, slide them until they fit the eye shape, and then extrude those upward. And to create like this deflector, I imagine like if someone was trying to stab you in the right below the eye, this would prevent the blade from going to your eye. So I'll just make the corners sharp for this one because I want some very sharp corners. And bevel modifier, just so it bevels after the solidify. And let's make it a tiny bit smaller. And move it inward just so it has some room to kind of hang on to, as if it was made in real life. We've now made the biggest part of the helmet, and now it's time for the detailing. So I said we would create back that edge trim, so I'll just duplicate the faces and do the same thing as before, so just offset using the solidify, and then let's just make it a tiny bit bigger. Just like so. Perfect. And you can use the subdivision set to keep corners or add loop cuts. Both ways will work. And selecting this piece over here, I'll just separate an edge right there, remove the shrink wrap target, and I will create some basic leather straps. So I'll just extrude the edge down, have it follow a bit of the same curvature as for the cheek pieces, and then move it down a bit in a straighter way, just like that. And we can add a loop cut, or let's just duplicate the vertex using Shift D, and then we're going to extrude it to have an edge. Let's make it a tiny bit smaller and create this secondary strap that will go at the back of the helmet. Just like that. And it doesn't need to look very fancy. I'll just move them inward, though this is important. You don't want them to clip inside of your helmet. Let's make it a tiny bit more rounded. I'll just make them go over one another, like so. Let's just tighten it a tiny bit. Same for here, although you don't need to do it maybe as much since it's not as visible. Now, for the real detailing part, we will need to create some holes for the rivets. So I'll just select the middle row of faces over here, and let's just make some space before. Then selecting that row and using checker deselect under the select, I believe. And then we're going to inset those faces once. Then using the loop tools, you will right click and then loop tool circle. Then set your pivot to individual origin. This is important so they scale equally. We'll just scale them down until they fit nicely, just like that. And let's remove that part and extrude it once just to get rid of that ugly edge. And you can see that auto merge is still turned on, so that's a bit of an issue. I'll just add another vertex here and fill the rest of the area. And this is where you can see that the shrink wrap method really shines. Even though this is really ugly, topologically wise, at least it was before I turned it around, we have perfect reflections all over the mesh. I'll just extrude them once and scale them down a tiny bit, just to have a protective rim and a cleaner edge. And we'll do the same thing that we did at the front for the back. So tighten that edge right there. And for the crest, I'm thinking maybe we could have some kind of holes in it as well. So exact same principle, although we will select 2 faces per group. Just like that. Now maybe it's not such a good idea to do it 2 faces at a time. So let's just select that loop and dissolve it, so we can do it 1 face at a time for now. Yeah, okay. Let's select 1 out of 2 faces, just like so. And we will repeat the process that we did for the rim piece, so to speak. So loop tool, circle, then scale it down using the individual origin pivot. Then delete those faces. We could have insetted a second time directly just to save a bit of time. I'll just do it for this one, which I forgot. Okay, and now you can see that the edges are pretty nasty and it's very easy to fix. We only need a loop that goes around. So I'll just select that loop, extrude it on the x-axis a tiny bit, extrude those 2 vertices and then fill the area, just like that. So extrude again for the bottom and fill that area. And just like we did for the rim, if you insetted the faces twice, no need to do this. If you didn't, like I did, well, you need to select them again, extrude and scale it down once more. So yeah, just a tip for saving time. You can do that. Just inset twice and then delete the face right after. Now we can try to add a bit of depth to them. We could, for example, just select the inner circle, then add a third shrink wrap modifier with a third vertex group, and then set the offset to, I don't know, like a certain amount, and then set it inside. But in this case, I think I want to leave them flat. It's just going to be simpler for our use case. Now, for this part, it's going to be the exact same principle. So, selecting the faces, selecting them once at a time, and I'm just going to tighten that area. And then selecting that loop, we'll add the rivets to this part instead. It's going to make a bit more sense. But if you added them to the other one, no problem at all. I'll just do it for this one. So selecting those faces, I want to add a motif to the other one, so that's why I kept it that way. So selecting those faces, we're just going to inset them, then loop tool, circle, set your pivot to individual origin, then scale down, and you could inset a second time just like that, yeah. And then delete those faces. Okay. So we have a bit of a weird situation here with the offset of the shrink wrap, and we could fix it using different techniques. It's not really worth it in my opinion. Like, you would just need the protective loop that runs straight, that is not assigned to the first, well, not to the first, but the second group of shrink wrap. So I'll just select the inside of all of those circles. Well, no, sorry. Let's just select that and remove it from the first shrink wrap. And then using this, we're just going to reduce the offset to pretty much 0 to make it flat with the rest of the helmet. And we can make our offset on this part instead. So duplicate the shrink wrap after creating a new vertex group. Assign the new vertex group to it, set an offset, and you know the drill now. Just select those faces you want to be assigned and add them to the vertex group. Just like so. And we have some weird issue over here. Probably just some faces that are not aligned, not assigned properly. You can see that it goes over the back part, and now for this one I don't really mind just changing the design a tiny bit to adapt, but for the front we'll need to tweak it a tiny bit. So I'll just move that inside over here, add loop cut to tighten that edge that we didn't do before. And for this part I think we should just make the band go flat near this, as if it was hammered just before the trim piece was added. So just like that. And maybe we can make it go a tiny bit closer. Yes, that's what I'm thinking. Looks pretty good. Now some more holes. So I'll just add loop tools, inset the faces twice, and then use the face delete, and then do it over here for the sides. You can look at reference or you can just do it by feel. I'm using a bit of both, like it's not a fully historical helmet that I'm doing. I'm taking a lot of creative liberties actually. Okay, now for the rivets themselves. Let's just take a circle that we duplicated from the hole, and then separate that into a new mesh, extrude it once, then scale, and create a kind of a tiny dome. So I'll just scale it down, remove the solidify, you don't really need it, it's a lot of extra polygons for nothing. And then I'll add loop cut and scale it down to have a bit of a lip on that rivet. And then we're going to select it. Well, I'll just tweak it a tiny bit more, but after that we're just going to select it, and then using Alt-D to create an instance of that object. And yeah, just set the origin to center volume, it's going to be easier, and then set the mirror to use the mirror object of any helmet piece. Okay, so I'll just make it a bit more natural looking. It was a bit crooked. So I'll just use Alt-D, like I said, to create instances and then place them over each holes. It takes a bit of time, so don't worry, just take your time and put some music, and I will see you right after this is done. So you can see how to do it for every hole. You can rescale them along the way if needed. I did it for pretty much each rivet. Okay, now we may need some more holes, or actually I want just to make the chain links that connect this piece to the other one. So I'll just add a circle and reduce the vertex count to like 12, 16 or something a bit smaller. And then scaling it down, I will go into edit mode and then duplicate a vertex, can be any vertex, and then reconnect it after deleting the original one. So we have a non-closed circle, just like that, and I'll just move it a tiny bit and extrude it once again to create this kind of open chainmail link. Now I will add a subdivision surface modifier and then convert it to a curve. This will allow us to put some geometry around it very easily. So I'll just apply the scale and then increase the geometry size. until I'm happy with it. And I will place it over here, placing the origin at the center of mass volume. Scale it down until it fits nicely. I might need to make it a bit thicker, and you can check the fill caps option just below the thickness to close the ends of the curve. And yeah, after that you just duplicate it using Alt-D instead of Shift-D, and I'll just rotate them around using the local axis pivot point. And just like that, we have our chainmail links, and we can mirror them using the mirror modifier. So I'll just select all of them and then add a mirror to one, and then using I'll just set the mirror object to the helmet, and then Ctrl L copy modifiers, and we should have all of our beautiful chainmail links. Now we just need to repeat the process for the facial part of the helmet. So I'll just duplicate the rivets using Shift-D this time because I want to edit them separately. I will just rotate them until they fit nicely on the surface, just like so. Duplicate them another time using Shift-D because this one will be different as well. And you can see that I didn't do it using Shift-D, that's why I deleted that one, but you should be fine. I'll just move it over here and then make this rivet into a bit of a more of a flat head. So I'll just inset the faces over there to have a bit of a sharper corner, just like so. And I'll rotate them until it fits pretty good. Duplicate those rivets. You can use Alt-D this time because we won't be editing them directly. And I'll just place them on the side over here. I think it will be better if we just place them on the center part though, like one in the middle, because this looks a bit too symmetrical and no, it looks too much like nostrils. Instead we'll go a bit more complicated route and just place them in the center. So I'll just move it over here, scale it up a tiny bit so it occupies a bit more place. And yeah, I like that much more. Then I'll duplicate it using Alt-D and place it just above using G and then Z to move it on the Z axis. Now, once that is done, we will only need to pierce the holes into the facial part. So to do that, let's just create a base mesh for our facial part. So crank the subdivision, then turn off the visibility of the solidify. Then we're going to rename the object to base mesh, and then we're going to rename our duplicate to face protector or whatever you want to call it. And then let's just hide the base mesh, select the base mesh as a target for our shrink wrap modifiers, reduce the subdivision back to 2, and then turn on the visibility of the solidify and turn it off for the base mesh if I didn't say it before. Just like that. Assign all your vertices to that group because you probably removed them before, and we are then ready to pierce the holes into the surface. So again, inset, then circle, scale it down, rotate if needed, and then delete. Like this one, I'll just place it over here, then extrude and scale it down, just like that. Then you repeat the process for the rest of the holes that we have to create, and I'm just going to slide those a tiny bit, just so it's more of a relaxed topology. That. Let's slide it over here, inset, delete, then we are good to go. Now I want to see the hole. I don't want the hole to be completely hidden behind the rivets, just because this will give us a nice edge that will catch the light. And we can try to create this little indentation around the rivet hole. So create a new vertex group and assign this layer to that group, just so it goes inward, and you can just do that using the settings on the second shrink wrap object. Then I will apply the mirror modifier after duplicating one, just so like I have the geometry on both sides. This will allow me to do the circle with loop tool. Otherwise, sometimes I think it works to do it only with one half. It understands you want to make a circle, sometimes it just doesn't, so it's easier to do that and just leave it as is. So I'll just scale it down, doesn't matter if it's not perfectly circle. And let's just apply it over here, and I think we can resize our rivet a tiny bit. Same for here, let's make the hole a bit more snug to the helmet. I just duplicated the rivet using Shift D, just so I could edit it without any problems to make it fit the hole better, just like that. And that's it for the first hole, and then we will repeat the process for the bottom one. Same idea, just loop tool, circle, scale it, inset. I think you know how to do it at this point. I don't really need to explain it to you anymore. So I'll just scale it down. And duplicate the rivet, and then just so I can edit the rivet again. Maybe we could have used the top rivet and just duplicate that one and put it at the bottom hole. That probably would have worked. Then just duplicate that row of faces and then apply it to the second shrink wrap group, or just use the solidify modifier offset to create an offset, basically, if that makes sense. And we're pretty much done with our modeling. Now for the texturing, I won't show it to you because it's done one in Substance Painter, but also because there are much better tutorials out there showing you how to make it, and I don't want to lead you in a bad direction. It's mostly just smart materials that I use, so I don't want you to copy those habits or feel limited by the teacher, so to speak. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye bye.